In this video, I'd like to give a demonstration of how to do a post-flight log review. I'm going to do a test flight with DEXI. This is not limited to a DEXI drone. Anything that's PX4 based, you should be able to go through this process. What I'll do is after the flight, I'll pull the log, we'll upload it to Flight Review. I'll take you through a few charts, and this should be a helpful tutorial if you notice any anomalies with your flight in air. You can pull that log file, go through some different charts, and maybe gain a better understanding of what's going on. Let's go ahead and take a look at a test flight I just did.
Altitude hold. Position hold. Flight mode stabilize.
Can navigate around freely. I've now switched into altitude mode. What that will do is maintain a constant Z or height. And you mainly just focus on giving pitch and roll input with your right stick. Now I've switched to position mode, so we get constant values on all axes, X, Y, and Z. So that'll just stay there, maintain position. Obviously, your floor surface is important. You can see my garage is very scuffed up, so it has a nice way of seeing and maintaining its position with the optical flow sensor. Now I'm switching back to altitude, maintaining a constant height, but giving pitch and roll input. Switching to stabilize. You might notice a little drop in throttle, so just obviously be prepared to counter that and take over. Now I'm landing and disarming. Now let's take a look at the flight log. I'm on the flight review site, review.px4.io. I've also pulled my microSD log card off the ARC Pi 6X. That's going to be generally a black card with a smaller storage, not the Pi microSD, but the log file card. So when I plug it in, you'll notice that there is a log directory. And now this depends on the version of PX4 firmware you're running, but what you want to do is generally look for the most recent folder, right? So this says September 25th. It's actually not September. Obviously, there's a date and time sync issue, but there's also a chance you're going to have session folders. So I highly encourage that immediately after the flight you do this, because each time that you arm your DEXI drone or any PX4 drone, it's going to create a log file. So you'll see these are different sizes. These 166, 162 kilobyte ones I know are just a scenario where I armed the drone and disarmed it. But I'm going to go down to session 103, so the most recent. Let's look at this. So you'll notice that it says 4.1 megabytes. That is a good size. I'm fairly confident that is the test flight I just did. So I'm going to make this window a little smaller, grab this ulog file, drop it onto this entry field, and I'm just going to say DEXI test flight stabilized altitude position. Just because if you're doing an analysis of a lot of these, you want to make sure you remember the flight that's associated with that log file. I'm going to leave share by link so it doesn't go public. I'm going to click upload. Depending on the size of your file will impact the amount of time that it takes. And the first thing that I'll do is just double check that this is the correct log file. You can see here it says logging duration 1.5 minutes, so that seems pretty right. And yeah, if I look at this, you'll see, okay, stabilize, altitude, position, altitude, stabilize. So that's the altitude estimate chart. If we scroll down, generally what you want to look for is that these roll and pitch estimated versus set point values. You'll notice there are two charts here. You want those to be tracking nicely. If you see any variance, that could be a potential sign of a calibration issue or something else going on, like perhaps a lot of vibration on your frame. But obviously for DEXI, we've tuned those, made the frame really rigid, and so hopefully you shouldn't see any of that. Local position X, Y, and Z, those are tracking nicely. That is the input from the flow sensor. We're doing this in a GPS denied environment, so we're using basically EKF, this extended Kalman filter from PX4 to estimate position with that sensor, as well as some other data fused in. So you can see velocity here, our X, Y, and Z, set points versus estimated, manual control inputs. This is the input from my transmitter. We'll scroll in a little bit. You'll notice this black line is throttle. You can always click anywhere in the legend to toggle these on and off. So you'll see my throttle. Immediately when I was in stabilized mode and I armed, I took off and then kept it relatively constant over the entire flight. We'll look over here. You can see an altitude, as I mentioned in the flight video. My throttle went down and then I had to counter it here to maintain constant altitude. And then, for example, I don't know what this line is, so I'm going to go in here and just toggle off a bunch of stuff. Oh, it looks like it's the flight mode switch. Yeah, so you'll see here it is at this value. Then I toggled in altitude, right? So it's constant over this altitude range, position back down to altitude, and then stabilize. Now actuator controls, this is what PX4 is taking from your inputs, doing a bunch of obviously calculations, and then setting your roll, pitch, yaw, and thrust values. So you can see here our thrust is generally going to be different or higher than the rest. And look down here at motor outputs. So these are the values being sent from your transmitter through PX4 out to your motors. And you'll see how nicely and constant these are, right? So I didn't do much, aggressive flying. Maybe here at the end, if you recall in the video, I was sort of rolling back and forth and pitching. So there's a little bit more variance here, but over the course of the flight, those look good, especially in position mode, right? Because you're just hovering, trying to stay in a constant location. Acceleration is looking good. You want this X and Y to sort of have a nice separation here from our Z. Vibration, very, very good. This is always a source of potential concern, right? As you start to see more vibration, that can lead to issues with the IMU, with your motors heating up, all sorts of things. So definitely want to be in this green area. You can see we're way down here, and this vibration, obviously, I'm going to assume if I reset this and I sort of look what's going on here, this first vibration probably lines up with taking off, and then this spike here is associated with landing. If you do any reading of the PX4, there's a whole page that explains how you analyze this chart or these charts, and see here we're looking good. If you see a lot of yellow, that means there's some potential issues, and before I wrap this video, I'll show you guys that link. Our raw angular speed, the gyroscope looks good. The magnetic field strength looks good. The distance sensor, you'll see here where we gain altitude, we're setting at what what I believe is 1.5 meters. So maybe when I flipped to some position, it increased a little bit, and I went up to whatever 1.5 meters is 5 feet, 4 to 5 feet. Thrust in magnetic field, power. Let's look at this really quick. So you'll notice here, this green line, this is battery current, pretty constant, right? We've seen, you should just in a hover be around 15 amps or less. You can see this sort of spike up and down here as I'm rolling back and forth in, I believe that was stabilized mode at the end. So if you start to see this spiking way up, there's definitely an issue, right? We've seen cases where, if I give it full throttle, I could be at 40 to 50 amps, right? But if you're just hovering and you see a spike here, then definitely an issue. And then here we have our battery voltage. You may be aware that, a full charge is right at 25, between 24 and 25 volts. So that looks good. Temperature is going down. And the reason is, like, just as you guys know, sitting there, things, warm up, CPU, all of that. And then the airflow, being in the air, the propellers and everything drives that temperature down. And so I'll just go down quickly. CPU, RAM looks good. Not a whole lot of processing happening. And then you have all of your non-default parameters, the parameters that have been changed. And some of these are very specific to the DEXI airframe. And then others, like these, if you remember in the setup video, we set different values for these flight modes. And then what I normally do is I will just jump down. If I notice an issue, I'll upload my log file. I'll go all the way down here and just look at this log messages. This is pretty good, right? There's, it's safe. There's no major errors, or sometimes you'll see magnetic interference issues. Here's a height estimate not stable. It's just a warning, right? And here's another warning, but we saw that was a successful flight. And the other thing I'll point out is if you ever upload your log file and you can't remember, what a flight or what chart you're looking at or what this page links to, you can always scroll down here and say, okay, that's associated with log 101. And let me wrap up the video by saying that, as I pointed out earlier, it says, do you need help with interpreting these plots? See here. So we go over here, and there's some different sections that you guys can look at. Thrust and magnetic field. And this is super important here. You can look through it. We've had a few users say, hey, we're seeing issues, and obviously flight environment, we're flying indoors, a lot of metal and other things like that can cause interference with the compass or the magnetometer. So, definitely look through some of these things. It's always a learning process. Every time I upload a log file, I'm learning something new, and I wanted to just share a bit of what we know about this and this process. I would say if you have any questions related to this, always just grab that log file, upload it here. You have a link. You can jump in our Discord, share it with us. We do that a lot with the PX4 developer community. It's super helpful, and at some point, we'll all get to a place where we can just jump in and quickly determine what's going on and then find a solution. So wanted to share that. I hope it was somewhat helpful, and until next time, thanks for watching.